what do you make of these hackings of 143 million people through the Equifax system? It's a huge number of people of the population, and I'm confident there are probably hundreds in Chattanooga who have been subjected to a hack where the information that's crucial to your ID, to your identity, illicitly by people who were wandering around for months in the Equifax system. There's a story in the Wall Street Journal today that tells about how they were there for 4 months before they were discovered. On July 29, Equifax made public statements about its vulnerabilities on the 7th of September. Usually, it takes about 100 days for a discovery of a hack. In Equifax's case, it took 141 days. The intruders built, according to the story, 30 web shells from which they could operate inside like a sniper's cocoon. They could operate inside of the system from any of 35 IP addresses connected with that interruption. Now, the question I want to bring up here, you might think it's a kind of arcane question, but I'm David Tulis, the slow man in Chattanooga. I ask the dumb questions. And I'm still on first base on numerous issues that I think if we realize how slowly we're moving toward first base, we might not deceive ourselves and think how flight and swift we are. We're really maybe less swift than we think. And the question that I'm slowly trudging toward first base to answer is, what is an ID, and do I have to have one? Now, we think that we all have to have an ID, and we all think that we have to have a government-issued ID. We've been told more than once in our lives just recently, well, that's not good enough. I have to have proof of your identity, and you can't prove your identity in a legal way, which would be by an affidavit or a statement from someone proving that you are who you are, because they know you in person, right? That's not good enough. It has to be the government. Or a government surrogate, some kind of corporate actor or entity that lets you create this thing called an ID. Now, the people who are hacked all have IDs. They have the thing that's created in this process. An ID is something that you have in our modern nomenclature. It's something that you have because you have had and want to have and are delighted to have relationships with government, civil government, and corporations. You want to do business in commerce. You want to have credit. You want to be able to do things online. You want to be able to be employed, all of which are either direct connections with corporations or supervised by, overseen by, and statutorily controlled by the federal power, the state power. And I'm thinking on that point of employment. Employment is an activity that is subject to regulation and subject to imposition and control. And so if you want to work for somebody, you want to work outside the realm of the master-servant relationship, which is what employment is. It's master and servant. Okay, think of master and slave. It's the same thing, except the servitude is not for the life of the person after hours and overnight and in sickness and in health. It's just for 8 hours, right? Or maybe, since we don't have employment on the same scale as we used to, maybe just for 4 hours a day, right? To keep you under the 30-hour limit, to avoid giving you any kind of benefits. Employment is cut back, and fewer and fewer people have full-time jobs. They have side gigs, part-time gigs, and the like, and some contract work and some partial employment. So we have these relationships with state and with corporations, which are state creatures, and to have the benefits of those relationships, right? Being taxed for employment is a benefit. Being part of Social Security is a benefit. Being able to pay into the system is and be able to get Medicare, Medicaid is part of the benefits of American life in progressive welfarism and socialism. These are said to be benefits, right? So don't sniff at them as bad things. For some people, they are really good things, and they are part of their you might say their worship of the state. That is an endemic religious problem today, Christianity having lost so much ground thanks to the churches in Chattanooga contributing to this delinquency among the faithful. Now, I've got a call coming in, and I think I know what it's going to be about, and I can almost predict the trajectory of this conversation. And this is David Tulis calling you live on the air. What's on your mind?
You bring up the best topics of the day. I'm telling you. If you're
Mike.
listening to David, you have to call around and say, you need to listen to this guy, because I can tell you show prep. And you hit another hot button, and 800-8949, I think, is your number.
Oh,
I know
thank you.
Thoughts, but
okay.
I want to hear what people think on the subject.
800-8949.
It's a hot button for me, David. And here's the reason why, and I think here's what defines you and other libertarians or Jeffersonian liberals as opposed to 99% of the world. And that is, libertarianism or individualism is about choice. Do you want to be a slave or don't you want to? And here's what infuriates me. And if you give me a second, I think you can play off this. I didn't ask to be born, but once I was born, I was told a bunch of lies in school and by my parents. And they told me that I'm free. Well, that's a lie, because free denotes you have choice. You can choose to do or not do something. And I discovered that actually prior to me getting my first job at 16, when they said, you have to go get a number. Well, why would I need a number? I want to work. Just pay me after I'm done. Well, you can't do that. So now I don't have choice. So now freedom is taken away because I have to get a social security number from the federal government. Oh, it gets one step better. And then they take money out of my paycheck. And I'm like, I didn't authorize anybody to take money from me. That's my money. If I owe you something, send me a bill. Well, that's not the way it works. Well, then I'm not free. Let's fast forward. We can talk about rights, how they really don't exist. They're just on paper. They're a facade and a lie. But let's fast forward to getting hired at a place where there was a union and I didn't know it. And then 2 weeks later, they said, oh, by the way, you didn't join the union. I'm like, what union? Oh, to work here, you have to join a union. Once again, no freedom of choice. I refused to join the union, made an objection, but had to pay the union dues or I was going to be fired. So this is about choice. Do you want to be a slave to take on the pretended benefits of the state, or don't you? Most people don't know how to do that, or they're afraid to do it. So there's no freedom of choice. Hence, slavery was not abolished by the 13th Amendment, but was instituted by the 14th Amendment. Thanks, Dave.
Well, that's a great point, and I was going to ask Mike a question, but that's right. We do have slavery, and there are. You have to remember, when we think of slavery, we think of black people, we think of cotton. Of course, you have the Hobby Lobby store about the cotton display, and people were upset about that. We think about the Old South and personal chattel slavery, where one man owned another, and then his family, right? He would buy the whole family, and the children born to that couple who were slaves were the property of the owner, and so on. You could say that's a system that is ungodly in a way. It's ungodly in a way because it was not voluntary slavery. There has to be voluntary servitude and voluntary slavery, and we have that in the biblical model of restitution for crime. That the criminal who's not the criminal faces two choices. There's restitution or capital punishment, and then again it depends on the crime. Some crimes cannot be mitigated. They require capital punishment. Kidnapping, for example, murder is one. The murdering of a child is murder, and that requires capital punishment. So abortion, or aborticide, as we call it, abortion, is a capital offense worthy of death. The mother and the doctor both are guilty of murder. They're complicit in a murder. But then if you're not involved in a capital offense, according to the scriptures, look at the first 5 books of the Bible. If you're not involved in capital punishment, in a capitally punishable crime, you are required to make restitution. And there is no prison. Okay, there's no prison in old Israel, in the Hebrew Republic. It didn't exist. There was an alternative system, and private slavery was part of it. If you were the guilty party, you negotiated a servitude to pay off the debt, the injury that you caused, the loss of property that you caused, the damage from a fire or a flood that you caused, broken eyes, injured arms, injured legs, farm accidents, things like that. You had to pay a compensation, and that was if you didn't have the means of paying, you had to enter voluntarily into a servitude to pay it off. And that was kind of private slavery, and slavery was personal, private, intimate, and it was very, that you saw that person every day working for him until you paid what you did wrong, right? Your neglect had a cost, and you're now paying that cost. It was private slavery. That's what you have in the scriptures. And Christians need to understand that. Christians they're ashamed of hearing that, but that is in fact what's in their Bibles. And I wonder if you, my listener, preaches on these topics, let me know. I would like to have that man come on the show and explain how that works. I don't think there are many pastors in Chattanooga who think that, right? It's in their Bible, but they neglect it. Now, getting back to this question of ID, you have an ID, which is I call it an avatar. Is a kind of a personal corporation that exists on a side of you. It's kind of like a trust that exists, and to control you, the flesh and blood person, corporations and civil governments use the avatar, use the ID. That's why they demand to show an ID. Legally, you can simply say, "My name is David Tulis. I live at this address, and this is my date of birth," and that should be sufficient ID. It's made, of course, if it's orally made. It's legally, if it's made to an officer, it's legally enforceable because there's the no false statement statute in Tennessee. He's protected by that, so he can know for sure. Since you know about that law, he can know for sure you're stating the truth. It doesn't have to be written. It doesn't have to be a special card with a hologram on it. It can be just a statement. That should be sufficient ID. But officers and officials demand, in corporations, demand an ID, and they demand something physical. And they demand something that only the state can create. So only the state can create your this avatar. Again, it's not your real person. It is a thing that sort of acts in lieu of you, a side of you, as an agent of you, and it does control you, right? It controls the flesh and blood man. Your name, insert your name right there. Okay, you're my listener. It controls you, and you let yourself be controlled by it. Now, the question I want to raise is about the future of local economy in a world where we have all kinds of fraud. We have in the advertising world, and I hope I can get to this about the suit by Uber for mobile agency ad fraud. It's an important story about pointing out how the radio business is really completely unaffected by this click fraud scandal that Uber's highlighting. But I want to get back to this question of the ID. The ID is an avatar. It is a thing that you allow to be created that gives you pretended benefits and real benefits, right? The convenience of credit cards, for example. You have this ID, it's a government creation, and I'm trying to think of the future when having an ID is a liability. Clearly, if you have an ID, people can create bank accounts in your name. They can file tax returns in your name. They can go to a Kohl's department store and buy $2,000 worth of bras and underwear and cologne in your name, right? They can do that in your name, and you're suddenly stuck with a bill, or you're traveling somewhere, and you're suddenly stopped for a traffic citation, and then you're arrested because you're wanted on fraud, because someone in another state used you, somebody dressed up as you with an ID that's yours, defrauded a Kohl's department store $2,000 worth of underwear, and there you are in jail, and you've got one phone call to make, and since you never dial your husband's or your wife's number, you don't know her number, and you can't make that call. You just don't know the number because you always just say, call home or call Jeanette, okay, and you don't know the number. And that phone in front of you on the desk, that old punch dial phone on the desk doesn't have that power. It doesn't have an app on it. You just have to remember the number. You get one call, and you are in a far, far away county jail somewhere, and you got one call to make, and you don't know the number, and that's because someone stole your ID. The ID is a danger, okay? And the problem that we have is that it's universally not understood to be existentially dangerous, and we accept that it's not existentially dangerous because we have all these conveniences. But what about the future? In the future, will there be a virtue that some already practice of not having this number? My children were all born without numbers, and they went for years and years without numbers. And I in a very grievous time in my life, I broke down as I was being humiliated in court. I broke down and got those applied on their behalf for this number and enslaved them. I enslaved my children in a form of economic coercion. You see, we do have slavery today. We have economic slavery. We have political slavery. We have legal slavery. We just don't have chattel slavery of the kind in the Old South. So you see why I'm only somewhat sympathetic to claims by people about these statues of General A.P. Stewart and Generals Lee and Jackson as symbols of slavery and so on. Those are simply beside the point. If you understand slavery in the broader classical liberal sense that I have, right, in the biblical sense from which I'm working, you will see that it's much more vast and it's common and it's much more insidious than it was back then. Slavery today is much more insidious. Go to Nooganomics.com, for example, and read my recent essay on the 10 forms of slavery blacks accept today without realizing it. Okay. It's a pretty, these are just things I just rattle off because they're so obvious. And yet black people think only about General Stewart. And they want to get that 1 ton statue on the 2-ton pedestal off the courthouse. That's what they're thinking about. Well, okay, let them think, let them distract themselves and think about those things when the real servitudes are elsewhere. They're in the area, in the direction of the hack at Equifax. And also the SEC had a hack. It's the front page of the Wall Street Journal website this morning. The Security and Exchange Commission had people dithering around in the files and making changes and getting insights that let them buy and sell shares at an advantage because they knew where to look on things happening in the corporate world that affected valuations of shares. And so they knew, and apparently the story says may have involved themselves in some insider trading. Again, we have the hacker, we have the hack, we have the ID, and I'm not going to get to click fraud. I don't think. Maybe I will get to click fraud, but the ID is something that comes from the avatar, and we have avatars because we're corporate persons, and we somehow think we cannot be natural persons. We cannot live under God directly, obeying His laws directly, without the need for government, without the need for the state, without the need for the sheriff, without the need for the officer or the regulator or the IRS agent or the president. You know, a godly man should live under God, right? That's why women have their heads covered in the Bible, because they're under their husbands. Men do not have their heads covered. Why? Because they're under God directly. Okay, and what we have in view here is a Christian civilization where you end up having very little government because most men are godly. Most men have their heads uncovered because they're directly under God, worship Him directly, obey His commands, live out His requirements in the name of Jesus and by the power of the Holy Spirit. That's what they do. You have a real prosperous and free civilization, a horizontal society in the future. It's in the future. So the question I guess I want to get back to is about these IDs. What has to happen for us to say, you know, I'm not going to have an ID anymore. I'm not going to have an ID anymore. I'm not going to have this legal thing. I'm not going to have an avatar anymore. I'm getting rid of the avatar. You know, I tried to get rid of my avatar in the late 90s by a process called a rescission of contract. And it's a complicated and interesting story is how that's done. I studied in detail the doctrine of rescission of contract and fashioned a rescissionary document to get rid of that number. And as far as I'm concerned, it worked, and all the requirements of rescission having been met. But the Court of Appeals in Tennessee said I had a number. So I said, okay, well, even though it had no authority to say that, it hadn't looked at the issue. It said I had a number based on less good law than mine. Okay, its analysis was less valid as law than my own. Afraid to say, but anyway, I've got this number, and I have an avatar, and I may be one of the 143 million people who are going to be defrauded now. Defrauded through the avatar that was created for me and that I have created by my own voluntary actions to shadow me, to be on my side. The means by which I'm in commerce, right? I'm in the world of credit, the phantasmagorical ideosphere world of credit. I'm in that world. I can buy and sell online. I can fly here and there. I've got PayPal. I can write checks. I can use debit cards. I have multiple accounts, and so on and so on. All those conveniences. And I control them, and they, through the avatar, through the corporate person of David Tulis, right? Spelled and styled capital D, capital A, capital V, capital I, capital D, etc. That's the entity. That's the avatar. I, the man, the flesh and blood man, in local economy, am controlled by it. Now, I've got a call. And the number is 800-8949, 800-8949. What's on your mind, caller?
Well, David, you have to use the weight of the giant against him. This is in the martial arts, and being a part of the system is using their weight against them, because one cannot fly or do any business, or if you're not in debt, you cannot prosper, because inflation averages about 3% a year. That's price inflation based on inflating the money supply. Actually, price inflation sometimes higher. So in that, become indentured servants or slaves. But those of us who are aware will tend to use that against the giant to eventually turn the giant on its head, or prepare America for when there will be an eventual collapse. Because let me tell you one thing, 6,000 years, There's one thing consistent in history monetarily, that you can start a system, you can't start a system on paper money, but you will end one on it. The Chinese tried it 6,000 years ago. It's been tried over and over again, and a non-stable monetary system by government and always will collapse. Individuals that have knowledge of how to rebuild countries will be necessary.
And I would say those would be Christian people who are submissive to God, obedient to his law. Again, that's an external standard of law, not an internal private will. That's another conversation. That we need to get into this topic some more. David Tulis here. David Tulis.
Information, Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.3 HD4.